And up first, 5.01, Pay to Participate Report. And Dr. Kellogg, do you want to start with this?
Yes, I think Mr. Reeves will be presenting tonight. I know the athletic directors are here as well. President Davidson, members of the board, tonight we'd like to give you an update on current status as it relates to pay to participate. This was a change in practice in the district a number of years ago, increasing fees to students for participation in extracurricular activities, athletics, et cetera. And Mr. Reeves has prepared a report tonight to give you kind of an update, let you hear where we are in current state, its impact on the district, ask questions, and if there's any recommendations like the board would like the administration to take, we'll be all ears. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Reeves.
Thank you, President Davidson, Dr. Kellogg, members of the board. Dr. Kellogg, you took my intro. So yes, what I'm going to share with you is just a snapshot 3 years later after the strategies that we put in place to reduce some of the budget deficits that we were looking at after a failed levy, and where we stand at this point, a comparison of where we were with our extracurricular programs, which are far broader than athletic, and where we stand today. So looking at our extracurricular fees, there are 3 general categories, those categories being class fees, club co-curricular fees, as well as our athletic fees. So very quickly, I'll give you a snapshot of what our circumstances were prior to the levy failing in November of 2011. So pre-levy snapshot, the extracurricular program structure prior to the levy is that as current today, we have a class fee that every middle school student pays of $5. All of that comes to the district office, and then $15 is the fee for high schools. And I'll explain in a little bit what those fees go for, but we still have those fees today, but we had them prior to the levy. We did not have any pay to participate fees for any of our clubs or after school activities. We had no performing arts pay to participation fee, including marching band, choirs, theater performances, which I believe South opens up this weekend with their theater performance. And our athletic financial structure at the middle school, the pay to participation fee was $50 per student per sport. And at the high school, it was $100 per student per sport. And all of athletic transportation was taken care of by the general fund. As far as the class fees prior to the levy failing, again, $5 at the middle school, $15 at the high school. That generates approximately $64,000 annually that comes into the general fund to offset general supplemental contracts and advisors, and including some of the supplemental contracts that exist at the elementary level, such as crossing guard and things that we pay for there. Of the $15 class fee at the high school, 10 of it comes to the general fund. 5 of it goes back to the graduating class of that student. So that is how they pay for things such as proms, to reduce the amount of fundraising they have to do for that, and is also accumulated over time. And when classes have their reunions, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year reunions, that fund for that class still exists, and they can contact the school to help support some of those activities. So that's how those funds are divvied up. And then clubs and co-curricular fees, the general fund completely supported all supplemental contracts for all clubs, all music, all theater, and non-athletic secondary activities. And the cost to the district in FY11 was $307,000. For athletics, as we shared, the middle school pay to participation fees was $50 per student. We had a split on the pay to participation fee with the general fund and the athletic accounts. $30 of the $50 came to the district. $20 went back into the school's athletic accounts at the middle school. At the high school, the $100 pay to participation fee, $65 of that came to the district. $35 went back into the school's athletics account. So numbers kind of small, but if you look at a pre-levy financial snapshot for athletics, the FY11 cost, supplemental contracts for high schools and middle schools equaled about $1.1 million. Transportation, it was the district took care of $100,000 for athletic transportation. That's all 7 schools, all 3 seasons. So the subtotal of that is there, $1.3 million, less the share that the district received from its split of the pay to participation, which was just over $250,000, and the cost to the general fund to support the athletic departments by way of supplemental contracts was about $1.1 million prior to the levy. As we all know in this community, in November 2011, we failed our levy and looked at a very daunting $23 million deficit to close, and worked very hard with members of the community, and we was able to pass an emergency levy in March of 2012, but that still left us with a deficit, albeit a much smaller deficit, so of approximately $7.5 million. So as a result, there were reduction strategies put in place to eliminate that deficit. And one of those reduction strategies for extracurriculars was that the general fund would not support more than 50% of all extracurricular costs. And I say that, I have the word collectively there, and that's very key, because a misnomer that we've had over the last couple of years since we've instituted this was that groups and activities and clubs and sports thought that they each were to support 50% of their activity. Some go by far in doing so. Some couldn't even come close to doing that. This is all class fees, co-curricular, extracurricular, athletics, all of the supplemental fees as a collective were to be supported no more than 50% by the general fund. So, in March of 2012, the extracurricular program, athletic directors and myself, we put a proposal together where we took a look at the participation of our clubs and our extracurriculars. We took a look at all of our supplemental contracts and tried to devise a fee schedule that would meet the goal of the board of supporting no more than 50% and still try to maintain as close to pre-levy participation for students as we possibly could. And so we maintained the $5 and $15 class fee. We did not change that. But we added, in the next level, clubs and activities, a $15 fee for non-academic clubs with a supplemental contract. And I'll go back and say non-academic, because we do have some academic and rewards-based clubs, such as National Honor Society, that has a supplemental contract with it. Student Council, Renaissance. We did not charge a fee for those because those were based upon academic achievement and/or rewards. And so we charged a $15 fee for the non-academic clubs, such as Fishing Club or Builders Club or some of those other clubs that exist in our buildings. And so a $15 fee was assessed for there. That generates approximately $18,000 annually over the course of the last 3 years, FY13 through 15, which were the 3 full years we've had since the levy. And that covers approximately 23% of all of the supplemental costs for clubs. Looking at co-curricular and performing arts, we instituted a $50 pay-to-participation fee for co-curricular and performing arts activities that had a supplemental contract attached to it. Activities such as marching band that has significant supplemental contracts attached to that for evening performances, jazz band, choir, orchestra, and theater performances. Students involved in those activities would pay $50 per theater per performance, marching band, the choirs, jazz, and orchestra for the year, and that would cover the supplemental contracts that go with those positions. That generates approximately $42,000 annually and covers about 27% of all of those costs. So then athletics, which is the largest by far slice of that pie. The recommendation and the implementation was that the middle school pay to participation fees went to $120 per student per sport. For the high school, $240 was the pay to participation fee per student per sport. And to ensure that we met the 50% directive, all of the money went to the general fund. None of it was split back into the athletic accounts. Immediately upon failing the November 2011 levy, athletic departments began paying for all of the transportation costs even though they weren't budgeted or prepared to do that. And so that was the strategy that was laid out in March of 2012 and still exists today. So from athletic fees over the last 3 years that we fully instituted this, that generates approximately $593,000 annually, and it covers approximately 60% of the cost of athletics. The cost of the athletic supplemental contracts of note, and I'll pull all of that together in a slide or two. The cost of the athletic supplemental contracts in the last 3 years has increased by $48,000. With the advent of a new negotiated agreement, we anticipate that that cost of supplemental contracts will continue to increase as a collective. We've also noticed that over this 3-year period, our pay to participate revenue has decreased by almost $26,000 in the last 3 years. And quite frankly, we know that the cost of participating, especially if you have multiple kids in multiple activities, is quite daunting for some of our families. And especially in the spring where you would have your 2- and 3-sport athletes, we've seen, obviously, as those revenues would indicate, we've seen less of those students having access to that participation. So then, as a collective, when you look at our class fees, our co-curricular, our clubs, and our athletics, we generated in FY15, the year that we just completed, we generated just under $700,000 in pay-to-participation fees to offset supplemental contracts of just under $1.3 million. So that covered 54% of the general fund expenditures. So the strategy that we put in place in March of 2012, we're still, for the most part, hitting that mark, but we're coming closer and closer and closer to that 50%, and as supplemental contracts increase, and if participation continues to slip, we may not even be able to maintain that strategy. And I'll also note that strategy was put in place to eliminate a $7 million budget shortfall that has been eliminated. So what's the post-levy impact in the last 3 years that we've instituted this? By eliminating the pay-to-participate sharing model, the athletic programs lost just over $95,000 in a revenue source that went back to them. For many of them, that was their second or third largest source of revenue behind football, some basketball. By assuming all of the transportation costs, the athletic departments assumed $215,000 in expenditures. So right off the bat, that was a $300,000 swing that was incurred by our athletic departments. If you notice, if you compare the $215,000 expenditure for transportation in FY11 to what we spent in FY15, we spent $128,000 in transportation. That's a 40% decrease in transportation. What that says to me is there's a greater burden on families to take and bring kids home. There are less opportunities for students in tournaments that they may be able to participate in, and an increased burden on our booster groups to provide some of that support. What that figure also doesn't demonstrate is that at the high school level, they also very frequently rent vans, because it is, in all honesty, quite cheaper to go and rent a van than to pay for the cost of transportation when you're only taking maybe a golf team of 5 or 6 kids, and you don't have the ability to pay for a large bus for that. What this chart shows you is that balances, so if you look at 2011, 2012, 2013, this is the beginning balance at the end of June by which athletic programs start the year to fund their athletic programs, costs, and all the things that go with the athletic department. So in FY11, the summer prior to our levy failure, the 7 schools, 3 high schools and 4 middle schools, collectively began the year in their athletic accounts of $553,000. And very quickly, with them assuming transportation costs, you can see that at the summer of 12, the summer of 13, the summer of 14, and the summer of 15, the amount of money that they have began the year with has decidedly decreased, providing a lot of stress on what they are able to do and provide our athletic programs. Now, what you'll see beginning in the summer of 2013, if you go back, we are covering 54% of our athletic costs or extracurricular costs, with the goal of covering 50%. So we purposefully did not share the pay to participate to ensure we covered. When we realized that we covered just over that 50%, we were able to share some of that back to support the athletic programs like we had done pre-levy. And you can see in the summer of 2013, the summer of 2014, the summer of 2015, we were able to provide those amounts, 122 in 2013, 29 and $35,000 this year, we were able to place back into some of the athletic accounts to provide support for them. Even with that support that we are providing, you can see that it's almost a $200,000 decrease in where they're starting this coming school year than where they were before. The interesting thing, because we are about to the point where we will no longer be able to provide under this structure any more support to the athletic programs. If we had never provided any support to the athletic programs, this is what their numbers would have looked like, and that's what you can see in yellow. So instead of $122,000 being transferred into the athletic accounts, they would have started the year with $328. Last year, they would have started the year with $249, and this year, collectively, they would have started the year with $187,000. Two of the schools of note, if we would have never put anything into the athletic accounts and revenues and expenditures would have remained the same, Walnut Springs would have started the year with less than $2,000. Westerville South would have started the year with $87. That wouldn't have even paid for two officials. And we're about to the point where we will no longer, under this current structure, be able to continue support. Now, I say that to say when we made this strategy in 2012, it was never meant to be a permanent strategy. It was meant to be a strategy to reduce deficits, and we estimated when we did the report that we would be able to run an athletic program for 3 to 5 years, and that's about where we are.
So I'm sure you have a bunch of questions, a couple of real quick things. So Scott did a quick drive-by on preconditions, the charges, and where the money went. Then he did the post piece where we're at now, and then the impact. A couple of things jumped out to me that I noticed one was the differential between the costs going up, part of doing business, and the revenue stream going down. That affects the whole shooting match across the board to that 50% mark. Aside from what it does to the athletic budget and their loss of revenue in the model, what it really means is if we maintain the current standard of 50% of pay to participate to cover the supplementals, at some point we either got to change that strategy, that metric, or we got to increase pay to participate fees because you won't maintain the 50% mark, right? So those come to mind as quick points. One of the things I wanted to ask Scott was, and I know there's some athletic directors here, because they had a revenue loss. So Scott, just kind of brief, if I'm an athletic director, what are my main sources of revenue as it stands today?
Your main sources of revenue are, the main source are ticket sales to games, more than like the lion's share is football. You have advertisements from scoreboards to programs. You have a market increase in fundraising going on. You have an incredible increase from our boosters. In fact, 2 of our 3 boosters at the high school actually give money to help kids pay to participate, fundraising to buy uniforms. One of our schools was not able to buy any postseason awards and just went back into the closet to tear off old trophies and just buy new nameplates. And so they have really cut back on what they've been able to spend on. But that's their sources of revenue. And so what really puts the stress on is football and basketball, both at the middle and high school level. And a rainy Friday night home game where you don't have a good crowd can be devastating to the athletic accounts for the remainder of the year.
So 5 home football games, 8 to 10 home basketball games. I don't know that we get much revenue out of.
Volleyball's good for middle school
Yeah.
and high school.
And then on the clubs and activities, we met with student advisory today at South and asked the kids the question, not about themselves, but anecdotally, did they have other students and families, and how were they impacted by the participate? And wasn't a student in the room who didn't talk about or nod their head and say, yeah, I know someone who has not or has trouble because. In fact, we talked about it in transportation too. And we talked about the athletic transportation. So while the athletic piece seems to dominate this, I'd also noticed that the pay to participate for athletics kind of carries the heavy load, because that was a 60% coverage and the other ones were less than 30%. So it's all jumbled together, but that's kind of the current state as it stands. And I think the big piece is, at some point, the lines are going to cross, and we'd rather have this in front of the board now if there's things they'd like to look at before coming to the board and saying, with our hands out, saying, okay, where do you want to go next? So I'll open up to questions.
Who wants to go first?
I will. I mean, I guess my questions are, I'd like to see a couple of proposals from an economic standpoint. Like prior board made the decision based upon economic conditions as they existed. We've made decisions as a board to put operating reserves aside. We know where we currently stand financially. We know the health of the district. We know the long-term health of the district. We're certainly in the position to take and evaluate this. I think it's very obvious if you look at the numbers that whenever you monetize an activity, you are introducing market economics to it, and families and children making decisions not to participate. I think whether it's band or theater or soccer or football, extracurricular activities fall squarely in the total students' growth. If that were not the case, then colleges would not be looking at what extracurricular activities you're involved in during your high school years. So I think it's part of the educational experience. I'd like to see some proposals back on how we can do this in a way that is much less onerous for students, much less onerous for all the extracurriculars budgets, particularly, athletics, I'm with you, but as well, the band programs, the theater programs, all have very large booster organizations. It's worth our effort to see if we can come up with some solutions on this.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. It is disconcerting to me that with really the good work that these folks do from all areas of the arts and athletics. And I don't know, as you were speaking, I just wrote just like a lot of just kind of, can some of these proposals address family caps? Can some of these proposals address kind of aggregating somehow? Because I'm sorry, I'm rambling. Talking about reducing the stress. Just to read some of my notes, reducing some of the stress on the families and the booster groups. I know the families are the booster groups. I get that, but the boosters seem to be like, we've got to help these kids do this. It's not coming from anybody else. We've already paid our fees, but let's sell some chocolate bars, or right? And we have been blessed to have contract negotiations completed, good stuff there, so we know where we're standing. The prior board making tough decisions. I don't fault. Those were tough decisions in harder times. We're blessed with saying, okay, now let's see if we can alleviate some of this pressure on families, whether that, again, that's CAPS, the clubs performing arts, I can't even read my own handwriting, within the bounds of really looking at our 5-year forecast and being faithful to where we need to be fiscally. But it seems to me that it's it's painful for me. I write for my kids. I write these checks. That's a little painful, but I know a whole bunch of people that it's a lot more painful for. So I'm not the example.
And I'll share also that when we talk about class fees and things like that, there's typically a general assumption that students who are considered economically disadvantaged are exempt from those. They're not exempt from these. And so these $240 and $15 and these fees without caps, without limits, apply to all students, regardless of their family financial status.
Thank you, really, for clarifying that, because that may be a misunderstanding out there. Yes, thank you. So I think that we're saying, I'd be surprised if others aren't about to say it, to try and help alleviate some of the family stress, some of the burdens, some of the fiscal issues. And I don't know all the options that you'll bring back. I hope that athletic directors, band conductors, and theater folks can just like put some heads together and creatively come up with some of these. I don't know. You mentioned, because you made me think of it. So we have smaller teams, smaller activities. Chess club goes and participates in a tournament somewhere. I'm just thinking.
Sure.
So instead of a bus, do we have vans? Can we investigate?
Yeah, unlike the athletic departments, they being the club accounts, have very little to no money in their accounts. And so a lot of those activities, boosters, parents collectively, let's hop in mom's car or mom's minivan and we'll get you there, or they'll pull their money together and rent something and travel. So they don't have accounts anywhere comparable to the athletic accounts.
Okay, and obviously I've said enough. I think we're just laying out.
Sure.
Come back with some options that are appropriate to the 5-year forecast, but also are very caring about the kids that are stretched.
These fees were put into place at a time when there was a need for draconian measures within the district. And thankfully, that time is not now. And yet we are still holding our children and our families, our athletics, our extracurriculars, all of the things that lead to further development of the whole child. We're still holding all of those people and all of those things to that draconian measure. And I very much agree with what the two gentlemen said. I want to see some proposals and suggestions brought forward. This is really upsetting. It has been upsetting all along. As I say, it was necessary to do, and it's now necessary in my mind to back away from it. This is in many ways institutionalized classism. We are keeping far too many children out of the very activities that we know lead to that well-rounded experience as a youngster, which in turn shapes your experience as an adult and who you are and how you interact. Life isn't all academics. Life is very much about interacting with people and learning the arts and understanding athletics. And institutionalized classism is not the lesson I want people in Westerville to learn. We have said all along that we are about reducing the stressors on families, and we need to look very carefully at that because this is a massive stress. For people who want to participate in any of our activities, it comes at great cost, and it is a lie to suggest that it's something that a middle-class community can sustain, that its families can sustain that. And we see that in the reduction in the revenue line. It is a burden too great to bear. At the same time, we've also heard repeatedly from our community overall that what really matters is the whole child. Test scores are over here. What really matters is what we do with the whole child and what we do within the whole community this program flies in the face of that. So I encourage you to look at some proposals, to bring those back so that we can reduce those stressors, so that we can put paid to this appalling, in my mind, evidence of classism in this community.
Well, I'm going to have a different opinion. I was one of those board members that had to go through the tough decisions, and I would not, wish that upon this board again. One of the things, obviously, that the community, the reason they voted down, one of the reasons they voted down the levies is it's just too much. And so if we continue to spend, and yes, we're looking good right now, but we need to stay in looking good so that we don't have to continually ask the community for additional levies. I would like to see you come back with some suggestions. I do not see doing away with all of the fees. I think those are decisions that are part of the learning experience that we expect our students to be able to do. Whether or not they need to get out in the summer and earn a few extra dollars by extra work, and that's the responsibility that we're teaching, a student as they go through school. So for us to just say we're going to pay for everything, I'm not sure that that's the way to go either. So I just want to keep in mind, for you to keep in mind as you're looking at this, that it is not something necessarily that, first of all, every student participates. So that means the taxpayer will have to pay for the dollars for every student, or for those particular students that are select to be a part of whatever. If they decide that they want to be a part of, one of the extracurriculars, okay, figure out a way to earn that money. Get out there and, know ahead of time, I want to play football, I want to do this or that. I think that, we have to somewhere just hit a happy medium without coming up with dollars. We want to keep, in my opinion, we want to keep that 50%. Are we at that right now, Bart, or are we at 60%? Are we, as far as the athletics, it sounded like we're at 60 right now. We're
But
going
the
down.
athletics was just a part of a broader picture, and
Okay.
we're right about that
Okay.
50% for
Yeah,
our extra.
I mean, we are paying more dollars for each of the extracurriculars, and we just nicely did that. So, I don't want to ask the taxpayers to continue, have another levy for that, because that could go down again. Then guess what? The board's going to have to face it again. So rather than getting ourselves into a situation where we have to, once again, make tough decisions, let's try to keep in a happy medium. So whatever you might bring back, just, I guess, don't swing the pendulum too far.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
my opinion.
So tell us what other districts are doing as far as pay to participate fees. I did a little bit of looking.
Yeah, and you guys want to share a little bit? My children participate in Gahanna's district, and they have a similar situation like us, where the middle schools pays half of the high schools. At the middle school, it's $100 for the first sport, $50 for the next. Third sport's free. High school, it's double that, 2-1, 2-1 and free. There is relief for students who are economically disadvantaged. They don't pay. And at the opposite end of that pendulum, you have New Albany, who is kind of sitting where we were a few years ago, and they're, $640, $625, no cap per sport, and that's tough for them and families that I know and you know that are in those communities that are not able to do that. Where would you say we fall in the middle? Top third. The way that we're structured now is probably in the top third. Greater. Right. Yeah.
And that's what I found. There were caps and family caps, and most of them were around 200. So tell us also, participation has gone down. Is it a certain school? Is it a certain sport?
You want to share
Do we know,
your experiences?
is there?
Westville North is a great season
Mhm.
because our athletes will play fall. That's our, it's historically that's the highest participation level. In the winter, most of our sports are tryout sports, so those stay the same. But by the time you get to spring, I mean, track is normally the largest. And if that's my third sport, and that's the third time I'm paying $240 for running around the track, and you're not going to get lost on, I'm thinking the lawn is going to do the same thing, run around the block.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
The other part I put in that is the kid who says, I'm doing choir, running cross-country,
Right.
Right.
That's
swimming,
what
doing track, and I got 3 AP classes,
Right.
right? So do that at a family table, times 2.5 children, and that's the number. I mean, that's-
And I have heard from our track coaches that their track programs are really suffering in numbers because for many, that's the second and third sport. About a week or so ago, I asked the athletic directors to put some numbers together for me. So for example, at Westerville North, we have 396 students last year that participated in one sport. We had 127 of those students participate in 2 sports, and only 8 students at Westerville North participated in a sport all season. And we had 48 multiple sport families. At Westerville South, we had about the same numbers, 356 in one sport, 105 in 2 sports, 17 in 3 sports, and we actually had 1 student participate in 4 sports. Am I going to guess that's a soccer field goal kicker? Cross country and soccer, and we make them pay $240 for each sport. So that student would have paid $240 4 times. And then at Central, 415 students participated in 1 sport, 222 students participated in 2 sports, and 24 students participated in 3 sports.
Do you find the reduction in numbers to be occurring also in some of the arts?
That's what I
Some
was gonna
music,
ask you.
some theater? Do you know that? Do you know?
I only have anecdotal things. I don't have hard numbers in front of me, but I know I've heard from a couple of choir teachers that are concerned that there is a reduction in the amount of boys participating in choir, and the girls' voices overbearing the boys are having an impact on their state ratings and all of that, and are asking, can we separate boys and girls, especially in grades 9, as the boys develop into the voices of men. So only anecdotally.
Did you? No, go ahead.
So when a kid participates in a theater show, when they're part of the tech group, do they have to pay the $50 too?
Yes.
So they pay for that. So 4 shows, $50 a pop for that?
A performance.
Yeah,
So
I-
if there is a Friday night and Saturday night, they don't pay 50 for Friday,
Right,
50
but
for
it-
Saturday.
No, I'm
50
saying,
for
but
fall.
yes.
Yeah, for each production. I think that I was going to piggyback on what John said. I've been experiencing this with mine, that, if you're sports, music, theater, then you have the stacking effect, right? I'm not going to, say that I haven't made with the kids a discussion around, you got to pick one, production or one performing art over the other. Not necessarily for monetary reasons, but simply because it just builds up, right? And I think that, again, this stacking effect, I would ask, I don't know where everyone else sits, but, I'd like us to move quickly, at least through proposals on what we do here. And if it's a matter of reaching some parity with other school districts in terms of how they deal with scaling and stacking, families, so on and so forth, then, I'd really be interested in seeing what that looks like.
And just, and I'll turn it over to Mr. I. As Dr. French alluded to, it was an awful time and some tough decisions were made. The decision for paying per performance was that the supplemental is by performance. So it It is a multiple supplemental position. That was the rationale.
Right.
And to dovetail on, I'm sorry, before you said a minute ago, I want to be clear on this. If a student participates in two athletic teams which happen to occur during the same season, do they pay both?
Yes.
So this child does soccer and cross-country, I think was the example. They would pay both?
Yes.
Okay.
Either that or make a decision.
Yes, and the reason I asked football and soccer, because typically the field goal kicker for the football team is typically the soccer player, and we debated that. And what if this kid only kicks Friday night and does not practice or anything with the football team? And the decision was it was $240 for both.
So,
I
yep,
just
go
want to
ahead.
answer the question that you asked, the first one that you asked Scott there, about the participation numbers.
Yes.
And I think they stayed, when we first started, I don't think, I know that they stayed very stable, maybe even increased a little bit the first couple years because people were already in high school and they were already invested. Juniors and seniors that had put their time in and now they were going to get their payoff by being able to participate on the varsity. But I think we're seeing it level off or decline a little bit now because when the kids were in middle school when this was implemented, people either, didn't go out for as many sports as they would have gone out for or didn't go out for any sports at all because of the cost. And so we're starting to see, even though the cost is the same as it was 2 or 3 years ago, the interest may have declined when they were in middle school and now they aren't participating. And I think that's the same with marching band as well. I would have expected marching band numbers to increase, but they have leveled off and not grown either.
Yeah, I've actually talked with all of the band directors, and the impact on marching band has been huge. And it's difficult to pinpoint it specifically to the issue of pay-to-participate fees, but there really is no other explanation. When I go talk to middle school music instructors, we haven't had a reduction in the number of students that are taking music, but we've had a substantial reduction in the number of kids that are marching. And that's even with the continuing of 8th grade recruitment, playing, with the high school football teams. And we're starting to, see those numbers decrease. And it's one of the things kind of, every Friday night when I go out to a football game, I don't hear so much about the teams playing. I hear about how big Westerville South's marching band used to be, how big Westerville North's marching band used to be. Those are the types of comments that I'm getting from family members. And again, it's difficult to explain it away to any other factor than pay to participate because the overall channel of musicians hasn't shrunk.
I think that's right. I do want to make one point that may not be clear to people who haven't been here very long, which is that before we entered into this phase, we had pay to participate then, and that was difficult, but it was much more along the lines of what you're experiencing in Gahanna. So it isn't that we're talking about going from nothing to this or whatever. It's where is, as you say, where might we find a medium to land? But I am hearing, and it is anecdotal, and it would be good to touch base with some of the arts people, arts and music people. I am hearing that parents are steering children away from arts and music as they move into middle school because they know they're not going to be able to afford to do the pay to participate and to support the boosters the way they need to, so they would rather channel the children away from that to begin with. And that's anecdotal, and we don't have the time to do a community survey about that, but there are clearly impacts. When we look at the sizes of the marching bands now, when we look at the students who participate, when we look at arts, when we look at who gets to participate all year versus who does not, and we think about what that experience is designed to be within an educational setting, it suggests to us that we have a significant disconnect. But I did want to make the point that we're not talking about no pay to participate before this time happened.
And I would agree with a lot of what's set up here. A couple just my thoughts, my 2 cents. Kids riding in other kids' vehicles is not safe, and I'm not at all supportive of that. The smaller teams, and I have a child who is on a smaller team, that they transport the kids back and forth every day. It makes me upset. So I would like for us to look for alternate methods, whether a van or something, but we need to work that out. And we cannot take kids to a sporting event and drop them off and leave. We just can't do that. So I would like definitely transportation to be looked at. As far as the arts, we all say we're very supportive of the arts, and I would like to show that. I'm not saying get rid of pay-to-participate fees for athletics, but there are some things where we should not be charging, and we don't need to at this point. So, just my thought. I think that's it. Anything else anyone would like to say?
So I'll kind of try to wrap it up in a big bow. One, the current 50% standard that we've had limits the general fund exposure to about arguably $700,000 difference between what we collect and what we spend. So it's that amount that we're talking about exposure to the general fund. How much more of that 700,000 do we want to look at to pick up to the general fund using the 5-year forecast as a measure for making sure we stay in that positive trajectory? We don't put ourselves back where Dr. French recalls, and everybody recalls, but Dr. French lived through, where we had to make tough decisions. We don't want to be back there and be doing the same thing. So somewhere in between no fees and some fees is a right sweet spot, and that 700,000, is generalizing, is a number to work with. And the goal would be then to address the burden that places on families. I heard family cap and costs and those pieces, put that into place. I also heard a goal of trying to remedy the athletic budgets, including the transportation fee as part of that. The last thing is my own, I'll throw in there. We have a model in which what was viewed as excess revenue went back into athletic coffers to fill a void there. On the flip side, all those other extracurricular programs, if we look at a revenue sharing model similar to we had in the past, where a portion of the pay to participate went back to the athletic fees, I would think that a revenue sharing model back to some of the clubs and organizations might be an enhancer for those programs. So speech and debate a year ago qualifies for nationals, has to do a fundraising event, fundraising to pick up the cost. Mock trial, thank you. So it would seem to me that an interesting part of the model would be if we are going to collect pay to participate, that maybe some of that revenue is generated more evenly to look at some of those programs to see how we might enhance those. Because many of those have costs associated with it that they're out selling stuff too. It doesn't have to be a lot of money, but some model of that. So how much of the 700,000 we are willing to endure and put against the 5-year forecast, and then how do we meet those other kind of goals of it? And we can put some suggestions together.
I don't think we can give you a dollar figure at this point, because 750,000 was the previous figure that we used before we did the negotiations, I think, if I remember correctly. And so
I'm kind of rounding up, that would be.
Well, I know, but
Yeah.
as far as us giving you how much more dollar-wise, I would say, if you want to avoid, a situation again, you need to look at the 50% model that we've been using, and maybe some tweaks here and there like you're suggesting, but I don't think we can't eliminate paid participate,
No,
certainly.
no.
If that's,
And I'm not asking for a number. What I'm saying, it seems to me that's, and I'm rounding up, I'm assuming cost increases because of the change in it, but those costs, right now, as you saw the numbers for these supplementals, and you can throw on the rest of the package, we're not, it's a fraction of the whole expenditure piece. So it's just a matter of how much more that the board's willing to look at. So we'll bring things back that have a tiered model.
yeah, I'd rather see suggestions of how you see us using the money we have, in a better form and method of dealing with it. So that, the only thing I'm concerned about is the few parents, and there's probably not a lot of percentage-wise, that do have to pay 3-4 pay-to-pay, fees. And that would be interesting too, but percentage-wise, I'm sure it's very low. But I don't know. But at this point, that's part of the growth and the growing up of children, learning to make decisions. You know, what do I want to do? What am I going to do? Like Mr. Byrd says, well, you know, you got to choose. And maybe that's where we, you know, that's part of our educational responsibility. I
But
don't
isn't
know.
school time the time in your life where you try everything? I mean, don't we want
Well,
to
I hear
let
that too, yeah, I agree.
I think kids
But-
should try everything, and I think it should be affordable. I'm not saying it should be free, but it should be affordable. It should be affordable for all. I have two questions that I forgot. Equipment, so how do they replace equipment? Because I know last year we had the band come and say they had raised money, quite a bit of money for uniforms. So how are we replacing equipment?
That is not anything that's allocated by the general fund. That is through their revenue that they, so for example, one of the reasons why some of our middle schools, Walnut Springs, I said they were so low, they just hit the cycle where they had to replace their helmets and shoulder pads. That's a legislative safety requirement. The general fund does not support any of that. All of that is paid for by the money they get from ticket sales, and that's how they pay for refs, that's how they pay for transportation, that's how they pay for.
boosters and family.
And boosters,
That's who it is.
Right.
uniforms, general fund does not
Again,
support
so come to the game.
replacing uniforms for the band or athletic teams. That's all have to be fundraised by boosters. And we have a couple of middle schools that don't have a booster group. And so they go many, many years and don't have the ability to get uniforms.
What about renting of the fields? Do we do that?
Mhm.
And where does the money go?
To the general fund.
Bart, you are taking every bit of money.
No.
The field-
We also use the rental of fields to put back in the turf replacement fund.
Yeah,
Okay. Okay,
It doesn't go back in the general.
no,
all right.
Sorry, Bart.
Just everything else?
It stops there, and then we move it.
yeah. I want the
I'm-
turf replaced.
I'm sorry, it's just, I just want to be very clear that I'm not asking for any recommendations that eliminate paid-to-participate fees in its entirety. I'm not asking for the community to take on the entire burden of extracurricular, whether it is theater, band, soccer, football, whatever. What I am asking is that we look at reducing the burden on boosters, candy sales, raising money, transportation, and some of these things that, back to Nancy's comment, may be some of the things that are holding some kids in school. Because academics are not everything. Please don't tell my children I ever said that. But what holds them into the academic place may be some of these activities. And so I am asking for a variety of options to see where we end up.
Understood.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Reeves, very much.